the thing that really changed was suddenly I had something I could do. And if I had a day that I felt even worse than normal, rather than lying there watching TV, living my life through soap opera characters and pretending that, that this was what was happening wasn't happening, I could go to myself, okay, so today I feel
like a structure you have.
Yeah, I go, today I feel awful. Let's go and read something that changes that mindset.
Yeah.
One of the stories that I came across was a guy called Meir Schneider, who was born blind, and he was told that there was really no way he'd ever be able to see. And certainly at the time this had happened for him, I guess it would have been maybe the late 70s, early 80s. There wasn't the treatments that maybe would be available now. And he'd come across an exercise from the Bates method, which is called, I think it's called palming.
Yeah.
It's where you stare at the sun with closed eyes and you kind of
Yes,
palm your hands over it. And he would do this for 5, 6, 7 hours a day, every single day.
Because he wanted to see.
Because he wanted to see.
He wanted to see enough.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I kind of read this, and I thought the average person which maybe wants to improve their eyesight, they'd struggle to do maybe 10 minutes a day. Something like that.
The optician.
Right, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And books like that were really fundamental, because I started to realise that people that had been through incredibly difficult situations and found a way out, be that in health, relationships, business, whatever it was, there seemed to be a difference in how they approached their situation. And, as I mentioned, up until this point, was very resistant to the idea of there being any psychological component of what was happening. Because to me, a psychological component meant people either thought I was making it up or I was just being lazy. So I was very resistant to that.
So I need to move you on a bit, because we want to cover the whole story.
Yeah, of course.
So at what point did you start to feel a physical and mental improvement?
So with these commitments, over the next year, there was definite improvement. It was improvement to the point that I was sleeping 2 hours in an afternoon to around 20 to 30 minutes in an afternoon. I was sleeping 11 or 12 hours at night. I was now sleeping 9.5, 10 hours a night.
So you needed less sleep.
I needed less sleep.
Like 4 or 5 hours less sleep.
I still had most of the symptoms, but I needed less sleep.
Yeah.
And I was more focused around my schoolwork, and so
So you were still going to school and bringing your homework back? And
as I say, I was doing my A-levels over 3 years rather than 2 years. A strength that I had is I was reasonably bright. So I was someone that didn't maybe have to study as hard as some people to be able to keep up with what was happening.
Right.
So over this year, I improved to the point that about 2 months prior to my A-levels, I was able to do, if I stayed at home and did nothing else, I could do 4.5 hours studying a day. The rest of the day I'd be in bed or kind of lying on the sofa.
But were you doing anything else apart from this more, let's say, disciplined approach? Were you taking any more supplements?
Yeah, I was still under the treatment of Ravi at this point, so I was doing various kind of supplements that he recommended. I was still being very disciplined in my diet and that kind of thing. But there wasn't much that was particularly new that came into things at that point.
You were maximising what you had at the time.
Absolutely. And that was kind of my life. And then, just very briefly, I got to the point prior to my A-levels where, I kind of realised that the environment that I was in was not totally supportive to my recovery, and more than anything, because for 3 years I was still at home, and I was approaching 19 years old.
Of course.
So to me, university seemed like the perfect answer, because if you think about it, students sleep all day anyway. So I was going to have somewhere that I would kind of fit in, and I could I'd be normal for once. Yeah. And I obviously I wouldn't be able to go out all night to sleep all day, but it seemed like a really good answer. Also students get a student loan, and I could spend some of that on trying treatments and that kind of thing as well. So,
but you had to get your A-levels.
But I had to get my A-levels, exactly. And through reading these books that I'd read, I'd got kind of inspired by this idea of setting difficult and challenging goals, but then to kind of build the motivation and find a strategy of a way that I could make it happen. So I had this goal inside of my head that I didn't tell anybody else about, because I kind of figured that I'd either think I was just in denial or I was, kind of gone slightly crazy, that I'd get straight A's, which is, at that point, A-level was the highest kind of grade you could get. And so for this, if I went out in the day, I could study for 3 hours. If I didn't, I could study for 4.5. So in this time that I had each day, I was absolutely focused on what I was doing with my study.
Yeah.
And this taught me something, around the ability to focus my mind on something. And I caught up a huge amount of what I'd missed. And then about 2 weeks before my A-levels, I had the worst relapse that I ever had. So I basically spent my A-levels being driven to the school. Most of them were 3-hour exams. So I'd write for 45 minutes. I'd then sleep in the bed next to the desk because I was in the sick bay at school to do my exams. I'd sleep for 20 minutes. I'd write for 45 minutes. I'd sleep, and this was continued until I'd
So the school obviously agreed to this.
Yeah, the school were reasonably supportive of what was happening. Yeah, I was, generally speaking, quite lucky in that I didn't experience what a lot of people do experience, which is outright disbelief of what's happening. People were sceptical, but there was support. And that period was a real kind of blur of haze of, I just was there, I kind of wrote and didn't know what was happening. But when I got the results, it was another kind of turning point because I did get the straight A's, despite the fact that I was completely almost incoherent on one level, but I still found a way to do that.